pain that will be caused, and somehow the pain's been numbed. This federal accounting standards decision to go ahead and put it off to 2010, it doesn't take care of any problems. It just keeps us from seeing what the problems are. They took the M3 away from us so that we know nothing now about how much money is created unless we go to private sources. So in a way, it's just removing the data. When you go to the dentist and they numb part of your face, you have no idea what that part of the face is actually doing because when you're numb to that degree, you could be smiling and everyone think that you're frowning. You need those nerves. You need to have that sensitivity to what's going on. Right now, it's like they're numbing us down completely. Now, what happens when the pain actually kicks in?
Kevin, we have focused for the last several weeks on the consumer and the middle-class American, and frankly, it's larger in scope than that. If we're looking at this as a global problem, then the pain that we see taking hold is experienced by a certain set in our society.
This would probably be a good time to bring on our guest, Gordon Pennington, a man that you've known for many years. Gordon, are you on the line with us?
Yes, I am.
Gordon, great to have you with us. One thing that has been nagging Kevin and I for some time, and we banter back and forth on these ideas constantly, every once in a while it's nice to bring someone in from the outside to make sure that we're not just stark raving nuts. But we came across an article by Václav Havel, who spent years of fame as a dissident writer, anti-communist revolutionary, and then president of both Czechoslovakia and the Czech Republic.
Yeah, an anti-communist.
Yeah. And he, in this interview, said something. I'd like to see if this is a fair assessment, and if it is, in fact, a fair assessment, if it has bearing on the people we're talking about and their response to pain, be it of a financial or any other sort. He says, what I want to say is something different. I get the sense that we're the first civilization in the history of mankind that is completely atheist. Human existence now isn't metaphysically anchored in any way in a code of moral conduct from which we can then derive a legal code. So when we hear someone of Václav Havel's stature give that kind of assessment, it gives pause and actually makes me think of the now late Alexander Solzhenitsyn, whose assessment of the United States and his assessment of the Soviet Union was that a part of our decline had to do, and their decline had to do, with the fact that we had forgotten God. Is this a relevant factor to consider as we make heads and tails of the world that we live in, Gordon, and try to account for human behavior in that context?
Well, to your introductory comment, David, I think you're right. When you introduce an objective outside voice to validate your sanity, it doesn't necessarily mean you are sane. You may simply be reinforcing your perceptions with other insane people.
Welcome, then.
While that may be humorous on the surface, the fact is we suffer from a kind of psychoses of collective subjectivity. By that I mean we like to reinforce our perceptions on a certain level because none of us want to be perceived as completely irrational or out of step with what we think may come next. It's usually left to the prophets and the futurists to tell us something we may or may not like or know about the future to prepare us for what may come and may be very unpleasant. The fact is, history reinforces that with the realization that there are all kinds of unpleasant events that take place in which most societies are completely unprepared. And Greenspan himself was the one who 10 years ago reminded us that we are caught up in a state of irrational exuberance on Wall Street. There was a correction period to that exuberance. It was sharp and deeply felt, but it was nothing like what we're going through now and may go more deeply into, as you've just cited the stats facing the banking community.
Gordon, before we go on, would you go ahead and give the listeners just a little bit of a background? You've spent time on Wall Street. You were the director of marketing of the number one growing men's clothier in the world, Tommy Hilfiger. Would you just explain a little bit of some of what your background, it's varied background, but it's definitely worthwhile for this commentary.
Well, thanks, Kevin. I've gone from Wall Street to consumer markets because I was interested in the power of shaping perception in consumer markets. And in that process, I was director of marketing for Tommy Hilfiger, and I worked with the president of Coca-Cola. We worked with Mercedes-Benz, British Airways, Apple Computer on a variety of projects related to branding and brand extensions and the implications of brands on new markets and audiences. And what I learned in that process was the power of not only research but media, traditional media, and now especially new media, to shape perception and to move people from gaining mind share to market share. And if you look at the ramifications of that, politically, economically, people are sadly very much subjected with all of the media that we have today. They're subjected to very thin and selective slices of what they want to pick and choose from that. The good dimension of that is that it affords us access to more resources than ever before. The downside is there is not necessarily as great a level of collective reflection on mainstream media. When there were 3 national networks, there were fewer sources to choose from, and yet at the same time, there was a broader exposure of the entire nation to what those sources presented as truthful. And I think there are many benefits to having more sources and more opportunities to assess what's being represented as factual in our media today. That's very healthy. The problem is, with all these time-saving devices, we have no time left. And our lives are so fragmented to leave us at a point where we are disintegrative. An integrative personality is what psychologists will tell you is the healthiest mindset to be pursued. A disintegrative personality leaves you with multiple personalities, or something less than a wholly integrated personality. And I suspect that instead of people just being purely schizophrenic, what happens is people are simply fragmented. And living with that individual fragmentation and applying that to cultures and societies causes you to realize that people will generally gravitate toward what reinforces their perceptions, their sense of identity, their sense of belonging, their sense of family or tribe or community. And as a result, we don't always prepare ourselves to hear something that's contrarian, that would be a fair, even reasonable assessment of what's deficient about how we see ourselves or our families or our communities. Nobody likes to be severely critiqued. Some people don't like to be critiqued at all. And I suppose it's almost impossible to endure consistent criticism. But we need it if we're going to be able to reflect accurately, and as you said at the beginning of the program, objectively about what we're seeing and what we're experiencing as a culture.
Gordon, do you see the obsession with the short news programs like CNBC, where for 5 minutes they can see if the market's up or down, or we can hear this little news clip or that news clip? Do you see that as contributing to that disintegrated personality type? Let me phrase it a little bit differently. When we're talking to people about long-term trends and transitions, which has been a theme on this program now for a long time, we oftentimes will see that the mindset of the people is what's happening on the market right now, what's happening today. They really can't connect last year with the year before or last decade with the decade before. How does that affect their behaviors?
Like so many dimensions of what's happening in modern culture, there's an upside, a downside, and there's a long-term impact. The upside is getting information in real time causes us to be far more responsive. The downside is it makes us reflexive. The upside is that we have information that can allow us to create a whole new level of day trading and technical trading that's different than anything that could have preceded it. When I was working on Wall Street, the fact was the state-of-the-art transmission system, in addition to the telephony that we had at that time. But the Internet, or the ARPANET that the military had developed, wasn't something that was in use, and most people weren't even aware of its existence. So you think about where we've come in the last 15 years, and it's dizzying, and it continues to accelerate. Moore's Law and other ideas that are attributed to the development of processing speed and chip cost and efficiency are all part of that. But there's a point where knowledge exceeds our ability to use it or use it wisely. So if you want access to information, that's a good thing, and I think it really is. The downside is the point where some people's personalities are oriented to simply having more and more information, and it changes our sense of expectation. We want everything to operate at a faster pace. Think of how you feel when you're listening to your voice messages on the phone, and you really wish it could come to you faster. Information, depending on the personality, of course. And Wall Street breeds a certain kind of very, very competitive, very, very aggressive, very, very potent and powerful personality, because it's the place where fortunes are made and lost and where there's a great opportunity to prove one's mettle in working with data and information and then leveraging it into value.
Do you think, Gordon, that this would make this reflexive personality type that's being built into society, does it make them more apt to panic if there's a dramatic shift that they hadn't seen